Hello, everyone. You're listening to Speaking of Art School, an oral history project created to perpetuate the legacy and culture of the San Francisco Art Institute. I'm your host, Thomas Houston. Thanks for listening.
Welcome, everybody. My name is Thomas Houston, and I'm an alumni of the San Francisco Art Institute BFA class of 1984. I'm the creator and the host of Speaking of Art School, and we're interviewing today photographer Wayne Levin, who graduated from SFAI in 1979 and lives in one of the most beautiful places in the world, in my opinion, on the island of Hawaii. And I'm going to read little info about Wayne here. He was born in Los Angeles in 1945. His father gave him a Brownie camera and a little kit to develop his own film for his 12th birthday. From then on, he was hooked on photography. After graduating high school in 1962, he attended Brooks Institute of Photography in Santa Barbara, California. Motivated to participate in the civil rights movement, Wayne left Brooks in 1964. Over the next several years, he worked with the Congress of Racial Equality and the Mississippi Freedom Democracy Party. No longer a student, he lost his deferment and was to be drafted when he decided to join the Navy instead. He spent 2 years abroad in the USS Hornet, 7 months which were off the coast of Vietnam. While in the Navy, his family moved to Hawaii, and upon his discharge in 1968, he moved there to join them. His interest in travel and photography led him to take a 1.5-year trip around the world. Wayne sailed through the South Pacific and traveled overland through Asia and Europe. He later traveled for 6 months throughout Japan and Korea and made a final trip to Mexico and Central America. Documenting his travels through photography, these images later became the basis for his first solo exhibitions at Gima's Art Gallery and the downtown galleries in Honolulu. In the early 70s, he was hired as assistant for the renowned Hawaii photographer Robert Wenkom. After several years working with Wenkom and architectural photographer Augie Salbosa, he started his own commercial photography business. In 1976, Wayne decided to continue his education, majoring in fine art photography at the San Francisco Art Institute, where he studied under Linda Connor, John Collier, Henry Wessel, Larry Sultan, and Ellen Brooks, amongst others. So that's a little background, which is a lot. That's great. So I think my first question for you, I have several, by the way, probably more than I think I know, but how did you, as a student, how did you come to know about the Art Institute and enroll in school there?
I had a good friend named Susie Miller who attended the Art Institute in the late 60s. And then she moved to Hawaii, and we became good friends, and she told me it was a wonderful experience and really turned me on to the Institute. I never knew about it before then. And I guess it would be 1976. I moved to San Francisco and started a 3-year student at the Art Institute. And I was assisted by the GI Bill, so it was very inexpensive for me at that point.
Yeah.
And so that, and Susie, it was incredible when I was there, but she would talk about, the photographers who were there in the late 60s, like Annie Leibovitz and Mary Sultan, Mike Mandel, Ralph Gibson. And some of them were just hangers on and some were actual students, but there were a lot of really great photographers at that time.
Yeah.
Sure.
That's great. And you had been to Brooks before that, before you came to the Art Institute. And that's a much more commercial environment from what I understand.
Yeah, Brooks was a very commercial school, and I was there for about a year and a half, and it was like too commercial for me. Although I learned a lot, I learned a lot about, which I never used because I never did studio work. I learned a lot about lighting, but I learned a lot about developing film, how to use a 4x5 view camera. But finally, I just felt it was too commercial, but also I became interested in the civil rights movement. So I dropped out of Brooks to join in on the civil rights movement.
In fact, one of the photos that we have to share is from Montgomery, Alabama in 1965. And we'll have to come back to that. That would be an awesome one to look at here.
It's interesting.
Yeah, but so from Brooks, you went over to the Art Institute and got your BFA there. And how was that experience?
It was really great. It was
Yeah.
a real turn on for me. I was pretty with the commercial background and working commercially. I was pretty formal, although I was doing, I was doing a lot of my own fine art photography. It was, I think, looking back, pre SFAI, my photography was pretty formal.
Mhm.
And I think the Art Institute really taught me, most of all, how to break the rules and how to kind of free my vision and also to free my ideas, and go deeper into ideas behind my photography.
Right.
We had wonderful critiques, and actually, when I was there, the photography department was really amazing. I mean, I can't speak for after, but when I was there, it was just, I thought, an incredible group of students and an incredible group of teachers we had, and amazing critiques. And when I went to graduate school later at Pratt, it was actually a little bit of a come down for me, after the Art Institute. The level I didn't think was as creative.
Yeah, I was going to ask you how you chose to go to Pratt rather than stay at SFAI for grad school.
I don't know. I guess I wanted to change scenery. I liked the idea of going to the East Coast. I actually applied to Yale and didn't get in. And Pratt was my backup. I loved being in New York. The best thing about Pratt was being in New York, and I became at SFAI, I really kind of became a street photographer. And I further refined that in New York, although I also did a lot of conceptual work. When I did my graduate show, it was like part conceptual, very conceptual, and part street photography in New York. So what I really loved about Pratt was being in New York, but I felt like Pratt didn't have the crossover with the New York photographers, except Elaine Mays, who you're going to interview. She would come to Pratt, and she was good friends with the teachers there, and she would come to Pratt and do presentations and talks. I guess that's where I first met her. So that would have been the early 80s. But other than that, they weren't, I felt like Pratt wasn't connecting too much with this really rich art scene that was happening, at least the photography department. That was happening in the city, perhaps in Brooklyn.
That's great. And then you moved to Hawaii eventually, and that opened up a whole another world, it seems.
To the island of Hawaii. So I had been living on Oahu before that, before I went to SFAI, and then I spent a year on Oahu between SFAI and Pratt. And my girlfriend moved to, then I had I got to figure this chronologically. I was offered when I just before I graduated Pratt, I was offered an artist in residency with the Ohio Arts Council. So I guess it didn't come to fruit until after I was living. I had this new girlfriend, and we were living together in Honolulu, and then I got this. It turned out to be a 2-year artist in residency in Dayton, Ohio, at the Dayton Art Institute, which was a museum. It was a very incredible residency. And my girlfriend decided to come with me and attended classes at University of Dayton. And then when we moved back to, we got married and decided to move to the Big Island. We decided if we're going to move back to Hawaii, we wanted to, really be in Hawaii.
Right, right. Well, I've got some images here, and I think it would be great if I can share some of these images. There's a great one from Alabama.
Yeah, this was 1965, the famous Selma Montgomery March. And what happened was they did a couple of first marches that were violently broken up and people were badly injured. And then they did a final march. Johnson activated the National Guard to protect the marchers. But the people who did, I think it was a 4 or 5 day march, and the people who did the whole march were the civil rights leaders and the people who were in the initial marches.
Yeah.
But then all these people came down to Montgomery for the final day of the march.
Wow.
And we camped out in a field outside of Montgomery and marched through Montgomery to the state capitol.
Yeah.
And something that's interesting is you can see this is the Montgomery State Capitol on, I believe it's March 21st, 1965. And you can see the two flags on top are the Alabama state flag on top and the Confederate flag below that.
Right.
The only US flag is being held by the protester.
Wow.
Wow. But I Googled the Alabama state capitol to look at pictures now, and now they have the US flag on top with the Alabama state flag below and not the Confederate flag. So at least that's changed.
Right.
It's interesting that maybe two of my most political series that I did is like the earliest, because that one that you just looked at was taken in 1965 when I was 19 years old.
Yeah.
I barely knew how to photograph.
That's awesome. That must have been intense being there.
Yeah, we stayed overnight at an all-black church, and they were telling us it was dangerous to go out to stay in the church that night. And then we heard news that a civil rights worker named Viola Liuzzo was giving protesters rides to the airport, to return back to wherever they were from. And a Ku Klux Klan truck pulled up alongside her and shot her and killed her.
Wow.
Yeah, she had a black man in the car with her.
Wow.
But we knew that we saw these Ku Klux Klan trucks. You could tell what they were because they all had gun racks on the sides and they didn't have license plates. I became really upset about the US treatment of refugees, of immigrants from the South, especially.
Yeah.
And the way that families were being separated, and what people have told me who were essentially concentration camps they were throwing people into.
Right.
And Trump's wall. And I decided that I wanted to do a project on it. And I was aware of artwork that was happening on the wall so I decided I wanted to photograph on both sides, but it turned out when I was there, the US side was closed because of flooding. So I just was able to photograph on the Mexican side.
Uh-huh.
But yeah, since I was basically an underwater or a ocean photographer, I decided on an idea for the project was where borders cross.
Yeah.
And it was the crossing point between the natural border between the American continent and the Pacific Ocean, and where that crossed the man-made border between the US and Mexico. So I decided to do this one because I really zoomed in on the exact point. Of course, the ocean with tides and waves, the ocean border was kind of dynamic in motion.
Right. That's awesome.
Yeah, the man-made border is set.
Yeah.
So this was part of the 100, like about 110 slide show that it's still up on YouTube.
Yeah.
I made a YouTube video slideshow, and my daughter and her boyfriend provided a musical background to it.
Oh, that's great. It's kind of amazing, just the parallel between the times of 1965 and present day, with what you're talking about, and current events and politics.
So
it's
it seems like I've become more politicized again. Become re-politicized recently. And in fact, my daughter and her boyfriend had a good friend who visited Hawaii, who he works for Save the Children. And he wants to they have about 20 shelters for children on both sides of the border, and he wants to get me down there to photograph their shelters, and I'm really excited about that possibility. And he's talking about putting together an exhibition in New York.
Yeah.
So again, that's futurizing, but I'm excited about doing that. I also want to get back to where I photographed before, where the border meets the ocean.
Yeah.
And photograph on the US side, which is open right now. But,
I appreciate the contrast of your work between the political in the world we live in, and we'll see coming up here your underwater work, which is all about the undersea world and how beautiful, and I feel like they're pretty transcendental images.
Thank you.
So that's a great thing. So let's take a look at another picture from your underwater work, that's what I was most familiar with you. So you've become a diver as a means of being a photographer, in a sense.
Yeah, I was a photographer first. Most underwater photographers are divers first, and then they want to photograph what they're seeing, so they become photographers.
Right.
And for me, it was the other way around. And
that's an awesome image.
Okay. So and this was taken in 1983, and so it was after Pratt, and I came back to Hawaii. I had a teaching job at University of Hawaii to teach photography. So I had been a body surfer and a bodyboarder, and I decided I wanted to photograph surfers from underwater. And at first I tried color, and I wasn't very happy with the results. The only color I was getting was blue, and it was like very hazy blue on blue. And at that point, it's pre-digital, but I was able to increase the contrast of the picture in the darkroom, because I had a lot of black and white darkroom experience, not a huge amount of color experience. So when I switched to black and white, I felt like it really opened things up, and there was a dichotomy of, are those breaking waves, or is it clouds in the
Uh-huh.
sky? Is he like flying through the sky or diving under a wave? So what the picture is actually waiting with there's surfers around and waiting for a wave to catch, or they're waiting for a wave, and I'm waiting for the picture.
Yeah.
And then a big what they call an outside set comes, which means waves that are breaking further out than where you are. So the only thing to do is you have to dive under the turbulence.
Mm-hmm.
And because it's aerated water, it looks like clouds because it's a mixture of air and water, just like clouds in the sky.
Wow.
It's kind of the opposite. It's like all these tiny air bubbles.
Yeah, that's amazing.
That are forced underwater by the waves. So
it's an amazing thing. I've actually experienced that myself with going to Hawaii and diving underneath a wave. It's an amazing feeling. You just feel like you're going to get pummeled, and it's actually quite peaceful if you get down far enough. It's amazing. So I think that's awesome.
So it's like a sense of protection, and it's peaceful. The only thing is you have to come back up to the surface.
Yeah.
At some point.
Right. And now you're shooting.
Then sometimes there's like 2 or 3 or 4 waves in a row, and you have to, take a quick breath and dive again.
Yeah.
It'd be exhausting.
Yeah. And now you're shooting film underwater. And digital above water, you mentioned to me. That's awesome. In film, are these 35 millimeter, or is this a larger format?
It's 35 millimeter. And when I was doing this back in '83, I was shooting Tri-X, which is a pretty grainy film. Later, I used much finer grain films. But I like the look of these too, but lately I'm not using film that's that grainy.
Yeah.
But also it increases when you increase the contrast, and makes the grain more noticeable.
Yeah, let's look at another one. These are just great.
Another one of people underwater. I was living in Kona, and we have the Iron Man there. And I saw some pictures someone had done from underwater, and I said, I want to do that. They had done color. I wanted to do my black and white.
Yeah.
But I talked to a friend of mine who, I don't remember if she had gone out she wasn't a photographer, but she may have gone out with a photographer before. She knew kind of the ropes there, and had a friend with a boat who wanted to watch the Iron Man. So we anchored, before we pulled out of the harbor, and anchored just outside of the swimming lane before daybreak. And then at dusk, we went under on scuba. It was about 30 feet down. And I remember how peaceful it was down below, and we were watching the fish, and real calm. And then she pointed up, and all of a sudden, all this pandemonium above us, like 30 feet above, it was like crazy competitive. The water was churning, and down below it was still peaceful. It was really strange. And then I ended up doing that, photographing it about 3 or 4 more times. But I thought that the first time, my best 2 images, I got some really good images that I liked the other times, but my favorite 2 were done on this first try.
That's
great. It was the only time I went from a boat. After that, I went from the shore with scuba. You couldn't free dive because you'd be in a lot of trouble if you came up in the middle of that.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
that's fantastic.
So this is a particular kind of fish called akule, or the American or the English name is big-eyed scad, and it's a schooling fish that creates incredible shapes and schools, and really dense schools, really huge dense schools. This is actually a pretty small school.
Yeah.
But I really actually, I would go to this bay. It's kind of an infamous bay because it's where Captain Cook met his end, Kealakekua Bay, and
Yeah.
I would swim with the dolphins there and take pictures of the dolphins. And then sometimes when I would swim out, I'd see, with what I first thought was like a coral head. And then when I got closer and dove down a little, I could see it was actually a huge school of fish.
Wow.
So I'd take a few pictures and then I'd go on to shoot the dolphins. And then at one point, I went, actually these schools of fish are even more interesting than the dolphins. And then I became, for the next 20 years, I became obsessed with photographing akuli and then other kinds of schools of fish, nowadays also. And
that's amazing. It looks like they're in motion. Are they?
They are
swimming.
And I call that one akuli pinwheel, and they are. I think they're eating little crustaceans out of the sand, and they're turning.
Wow.
Counterclockwise. And so they're in motion. And also, I dove down and got some side shots of that, and it looks flat from this angle, but it was actually dome shaped.
Oh wow!
And when I went down, I could see that, it was maybe about 10 feet high. It was, a dome shape.
Really? Wow, that's amazing.
And doing this work, I really started thinking, like, the way I was with a colleague so often, and the way they would react and move was like a single being. I started wondering, what's the individual? Is it the fish, each fish, or is it the school?
Right.
And the individuals are like cells within something larger. And then to go further philosophically, like, what does that say about other life forms, including humanity? Are we really individual beings unto ourselves, or are we part of something larger? Are we part of the living earth?
Right.
So it just goes on and on. But to me, this work, which I'm still working on, that's like, that question is like the driving force of that work.
Right. Yeah. That phenomenon kind of reminds me of birds that fly together in big masses. They seem to have a group mind going on, and it's quite fascinating.
Well, in fact, I also went to England to photograph starlings. Just photographed the starling flocks. I went there, and I also went to Oregon with my sister Beth, who and we went to like Klamath, and we went to Klamath, to like Tule Lake area. In Northern California, to photograph migrating geese. So I really got into the birds, and I'd like to do more of that. And I was thinking of other things, like even humans. To photograph huge crowds of humans.
It appears to me like when you moved to Hawaii, it opened up a whole new world for your artistic vision. Is that accurate? Or
it did. Actually, if I moved to Hawaii, and after I got married, we decided to move to the Big Island, and a friend said, "Oh, you should go photograph the dolphins in Kealakekua Bay." And then I took them up on it and went out there with my underwater camera and started photographing dolphins. And then that led to, I'd see other things when I went out, I'd see manta rays and eagle rays. And I was mostly interested in big things, like some people do beautiful close-up underwater color, color photography usually. But I
Mm-hmm.
was, I got into photographing whales and sharks, and but the schools of fish were also big too.
Yeah.
So I photographed. So I got into photographing as like I made a rule for myself, which was that this project, this ongoing project, would be black and white photography underwater, and that was the rule. But with that rule, anything, I had total freedom as far as the subject matters.
Yeah.
So I photographed shipwrecks. I went to a couple of islands that are really renowned for their shipwrecks, and photographed there. And
Awesome. Yeah.
yeah, photographed seascapes and swimmers, as you saw. Yeah, so it's many
That's great.
different subject
Well, and
matter.
the black and white images are so evocative.
Oh, thank you.
I'm thinking that if this was in color, it would be a completely different experience to look at it.
Yeah, when I did these photographs, not to, when I, up until recently, not many people were doing black and white underwater. There were a few, but not many. But now
Yeah.
that everybody's gone digital,
Mm-hmm.
it's so easy to turn a color picture into black and white. And of a picture of an image looks better in black and white.
Right.
People do it. So there's a lot more black and white underwater now than there used to be.
Uh-huh. Now, when you have physical exhibits of your work, are these printed quite large, or what kind of size do
It
these end up
varies.
being?
The smallest I exhibit usually are the image size is about 12 by 18, and
Uh-huh.
frame 20 by 24.
Yeah.
But I also do large prints, and yeah, so I exhibit those and sell large prints too. My usual sizes are 28 by 40
Uh-huh.
image size, or it was something by 60, whatever it is by 60. So
Right.
yeah, so I would have them printed. I think the largest I've printed is like 90 something.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
So since I'm, having digital prints made, I make my own scans for the prints up to like 24 inches.
Uh-huh.
But beyond that, I get drum scans, which
Right.
are, very high resolution scans, and I send it to a lab in California for that.
Uh-huh.
The only other pictures I have here are a couple self-portraits, or not self-portraits, portraits.
I see.
You want to see those?
Interesting. Sure. Why not?
They did a magazine article about me, and a friend of mine, I did pictures of me, and we get into breaking waves to
Oh,
make
yeah.
more interesting pictures. So
Awesome.
this is my favorite one he took.
You did a photo series of the what used to be the leper colony on Molokai
Yeah.
at Kalaupapa, and that
Yes.
sounds like that must have been very interesting going there and photographing that environment.
Actually, the way that happened is I got a strange job. Some lady called me to photograph her apartment. So I was photographing her apartment, and she had recently been to Kalaupapa, and she told me that I should go there, that I should do a photo project and photograph it. And at that time, it was in the heart of when I was photographing the body surfers.
Mm-hmm.
And I told her, I'm not really that interested in that. I didn't think too much about it. But then I started thinking about it and realizing that it's, it was still a pretty active community.
Uh-huh.
It was a real opportunity to photograph to do a real documentary project, photographing something that wasn't going to be around, too much longer.
Right.
It was a moment in time. So I got back to her and said, actually, I think I would like to do that. And then she set up a meeting with this young lady, her name, Anwe Skinsness-La. No, actually, her name, she wasn't married yet. It was Anwe Skinsness. And her father was like the head pathologist who would go there and work with leprosy patients.
Yeah.
And she had been working on video oral histories. And she was interested in me coming along and doing still photography. So I took my 4x5 view camera and started photographing there. The first time I took a 35mm camera.
Yeah.
I photographed at that time, I was mostly photographing. The people were very reticent to be photographed.
Yeah.
And I photographed, but I was able to photograph the oldest patient there at that time. In her house. And she was like in her mid 80s at that point, and she lived another she lived into her 90s, I think. And but she never was in that house again. The next time I came back, she had moved into the hospital.
Wow.
So that was, interesting, and I got a really good picture, I thought, of her.
Wow.
But then I started going over with Odway and a guy named Gene Bobek, who was her videographer. So the three of us would go over and, I'd photograph the landscape and artifacts there. And then slowly, people would get used to me and allow me to photograph them. And because I was using a 4x5 camera where you have to put a dark cloth over your head and it takes like 15 minutes to set up the picture.
Right.
You couldn't do any grab shots.
Right.
And I had to have written permission for when I photographed a person.
Wow, that's awesome.
So, we had releases. So yeah, so there were, no photographs of people that they didn't agree to.
Right.
But still, I've been hesitant to do too much with, I've exhibited them, and actually there were 2 books that came out. But I usually, like the people pictures, I don't have up on my website.
Sure.
I have some of the other ones.
Yeah.
Because actually the releases were for the book.
Yeah.
And for a show connected to the book. And then later we did a second book.
Right.
A second show. Yeah. And then actually later I went back, I kind of mostly photographed between 84 and like 89. And then I stopped doing that work. But then in the, was that right? 84 to 89, yeah. And then I stopped doing that. And then in the mid 90s, they started the Ka'ohana o Kalaupapa, which was a family members group, because the patient population was quickly dwindling. It was like about 100 patients left when I was photographing, and now it's maybe 5 or 6.
Yeah. Wow.
I'm not sure exactly. It's very, very few left.
Wow. That's amazing.
Yeah, but anyway, I started going over again with the Ohana and photographing the ceremonies and the Ohana members with their family members or their family members' grave sites.
Right.
And so that was part of the second book that came out.
Wow. That's a powerful and intense subject matter there for sure.
Boy, being a photographer has been a passport for some amazing things for me. And I also photographed on the project of the island of Kaho'olawi, which the military owned for a while. It was actually a cattle ranch for a while, cattle ranch island. It got totally defoliated. They also had goats there, which Vancouver came over and thought it would be a good idea to put goats on the island. So the island got really majorly defoliated. Then the military used it for bombing practice.
Wow.
So it was filled with munitions. But then me, along with 3 other photographers, did a book on Kaho'olawi. So we took trips there. In certain areas we had to have a munitions expert with like a metal detector with us.
Wow.
So we didn't, because there was munitions buried in the earth that if you step on could explode.
Yeah, of course. Wow. That's amazing.
So now the Hawaiians, and actually now the island reverted back to the state of Hawaii, and it's really become a real learning place for Native Hawaiians and other people who want to participate.
Well, that's
they spent millions of dollars trying to clean up the munitions, and they weren't able to totally.
Yeah, it's nearly impossible, I'm sure.
Yeah.
But
the defoliation of the island caused an average. This is like pretty insane to me. An average of 3 meters of topsoil being washed away over the island.
Wow.
So that's like 10 feet.
Yeah.
Of soil.
Wow. That's crazy. Huh.
Yeah.
Well, we're getting to the end of our time here. So I really appreciate our conversation, Wayne. And it's been great. Your images are fantastic. As you know, we come to Hawaii. It's our favorite place to go. And we go there as often as we can. So I hope to see you in person at some point in the near future.
Great. I look forward to that.
Yeah.
We'll go snorkeling and have a good meal together.
That would be great. That would be excellent. Well, mahalo. I really appreciate it. And we'll be in touch.
Great. Okay.
Thanks, Wayne.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you for interviewing me. Thank you.
Absolutely. I greatly appreciate it. I'd like to thank everybody for watching this. As I said, my name's Tom Houston. Stay tuned for future episodes of Speaking of Art School.
You've been listening to Speaking of Art School, an oral history project created to perpetuate the culture and legacy of the San Francisco Art Institute. I'm your host, Thomas M. Houston. If you're an alumni of SFAI and would like to participate in this project, please contact me at thomasmhoustonartist@gmail.com. Please stay tuned for upcoming episodes, and as always, thanks for listening.